Hello, I'm Alex Thomas. I'm a Programme Director at the Institute for Government, and I chaired a brilliant discussion recently at our Government 25 conference about rewiring the civil service. Unfortunately, while we were hoping to hear from colleagues who were in Singapore at that event, the technology failed us, but they did record it, and here it is as a little bit of bonus content to our Government 2025 conference. So over to Siobhan Benita, who chaired a separate discussion from Singapore.
Okay, so hello everybody. I think we are now going to be having our conversation, and then this will be shown back to the audience in London later today. I think I'm Siobhan Benita. I'm a former UK civil servant. Delighted to be here in Singapore with three fantastic speakers with us, and we are going to be feeding into part of this session, which is looking at kind of the fact that they have a new cabinet secretary in the UK, Chris Wormold, and he has been tasked with rewiring the civil service. So it's kind of what can Chris learn from other countries around the world when it comes to transformation of the civil service. And Gus, also I'll be drawing on your experience of maybe the UK and what you think Chris could be doing in his first few months in the job. I'm delighted to be joined today. I have Taimar Peterkop, who is Secretary of State for Estonia. I have Heather Baggott, who is the Deputy Public Service Commissioner for New Zealand, and then will be familiar to many people in the Institute for Government audience. I've got Gus O'Donnell here, who was the former Cabinet Secretary and Head of the UK Civil Service. So Taimar, I'm going to come to you first, thinking about transformation of the civil service. You've been in post for over 6 years in Estonia as head of the civil service there, and you've had to navigate some very challenging times during your position there. You've driven forward a lot of transformation, and you are leaving your post now, I believe, at the end of the month. So I think now is a very timely opportunity for me to say, what advice would you give Chris coming into post on what's worked well for you, and maybe with hindsight, what more you might wanted to have achieved?
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to share the little that I've learned in this past 6 years. I think most important, or the most important lesson, or what I'm most proud of, is the way the Estonian government has operated in these difficult times in the past 6 years. We learned during the COVID how to cooperate with the scientists, with the senior civil servants. The first wave was catastrophe, but then during the next waves we learned from that. And when we entered the Ukraine crisis and how it has affected us, we were ready. The government, the Estonian government, and senior civil servants were operating in a same pace. We had government security meetings together with the top civil servants, together with the politicians, everybody sitting around the same table, being on the same page, and that allowed Estonia to, not to be ahead of the curve, but to react very quickly, internationally, nationally. We've been a very strong supporter of Ukraine, and this cooperation, this format, that I understand, I thought that I created it, but when I spoke to Gus about it last year, then Gus said, I did it. So it's not anything new, but it's the importance of to have all the decision makers around the same table allowed us to react quickly and with good effort. The second part that it didn't work out so well, of course, the biggest thing to mention is, of course, the vaccination during the COVID, but I'm not going to dwell on that. But I think what I feel most sad or bad is that the way this crisis have made government operate and make decisions. It's that we are making decisions very fast based on a little amount of information, and this has become everyday business as usual. And I should have slowed it down. That it's not every decision is not about crisis. That that you should still have an open government. You should include people. And I think it has actually had a big impact on the trust that Estonians have on their government, the negative impact.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Taimar. It's a great place to start the conversation. So I think lots to learn there from bringing ministers and senior civil servants together and having that shared vision going forward. That's something in Global Government Forum we've found lots of senior leaders around the world have said they want better cooperation between ministers and senior civil servants. But also really interesting to hear you say there that although it was great during the COVID period to move so fast and be able to be agile and make those fast decisions, there comes a moment where you also need to slow back down and make sure you have all the evidence in front of you to take those decisions. I wonder for the new Cabinet Secretary in the UK, whether there's this desire to be moving really quickly and maybe some of those mistakes might be made as well in the UK. I'm sure the audience will be thinking about that back in London. Heather, I want to come to you on one issue that any Cabinet Secretary, any new Cabinet Secretary will have to deal with, because it's something that we know is an issue around the world, and that's building trust with citizens. So could you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in New Zealand, and is it working well in terms of building trust with your public?
Well, thank you, and hello, kia ora. Lovely to be here and to have the opportunity to share our insights from our small island nation at the bottom of the world. Some things I think we do pretty well. We are fortunate to rate pretty highly internationally in terms of measures of trust in our public service. But having said that, I'm pretty close to the action. I know there's plenty of areas that we can improve. We've been through a period of reform in our public service the last sort of 6 years, and it's been quite a relentless and extensive focus on being better and being fit for purpose for a modern world. And at the heart of that is a relentless focus on trust and confidence, and we all know how important that is, our social licence, our legitimacy to operate. And there's a range of things we're doing, from very soft to hard levers and interventions. So I'll just briefly talk about a couple of those that have been really important for us and have borne fruit in terms of continue to have that focus. So first of all, we had the opportunity to reform our Act, and hardwired in there, really clear, is the purpose of the public service, our core values and our core principles. And so they are, heavily hardwired into our legislation to uphold those important things for us, like political neutrality, free and frank advice, merit-based appointments, open government stewardship. And so it's not just words either. There are explicit responsibilities on the chief executives of the departments to uphold those and to exemplify them and to nurture those across the public service. And we talk about nurturing the spirit of service to the community, and as leaders, all public servants, as we know, are intrinsically motivated to do good for their community. That's why they come to work every day. But as leaders, you can't take that for granted. It doesn't happen by chance. You have to actively nurture that, and the same goes for building trust and confidence, which is hard to do and is easily lost. So having that continuous focus on it. So one of the things that we have done is increased our frequency on how we are on measuring trust and confidence in the public service and the experience and the brand. So we do that quarterly now, and we publish those results. So they're very transparent about how we're going. And we saw a big lift during COVID, and we've dropped back down, but we've still maintained above our pre-COVID levels. And constantly looking at what are the drivers for trust. We know that the 3 key drivers are, one, the quality of the public experiences with the services they receive and how responsive we are to them. Number 2, how fairly they are treated, people who are experiencing that, and how well they're respected. But 3, high integrity in our public service, and that's an area of focus for us. So a couple of things. One, in the open government and free and frank space, we are very diligent about being responsive to our Official Information Act requests. We measure agency performance, and we publish that. And meeting statutory deadlines is really important to show New Zealanders, actually, yes, we take your requests for information and transparency seriously, And also we've introduced this measure of proactively releasing our advice to ministers, and government adopted, the last administration, the proactive release of cabinet papers. And the policy is cabinet papers must be released within 30 days of decisions. And in the main, we've still got some way to go, but about 75% of those are released. But it changes the transparency around these decisions and the advice that officials are giving. It's an accountability mechanism. The other brief thing I'll mention is just really focusing on people and culture and nurturing the network, the communities of practice of people who are thinking about integrity and how they're growing that capability within the organisation. So we have a team of what are called integrity champions. So they're a senior leader in every agency who are responsible for coming together frequently to discuss implementing new guidance, implementing new standards, and they advise the chief executives and the agencies as to their good practice and what they can do to improve. So those are
fantastic. Thank you so much. So lots of things there that I think the UK could be looking at to see if they could do similar things. I don't know what you think, Gus, about the idea of publishing kind of advice to ministers. We can talk about that maybe on another conversation, but I could see your eyebrows going up on that one. But Gus, I wanted to ask you a slightly different take on it. So from your experience in the UK yourself as Cabinet Secretary, but also you work with lots of countries now around the world, if you were now the new Cabinet Secretary coming in and the Prime Minister asked you to rewire the civil service, where would you start? Are there any quick wins? And where do you think Chris's biggest challenges are going to lie?
So I'd start with asking the Prime Minister why. Why does he want to rewire the British state, is what he actually said. And what are the outcomes he's looking for? Because it's not a rewiring job, right? It's a question of what are the outcomes and how do we best deliver them? So that does mean that you do change the way you organize things, the way you change decisions. You were talking about the whole National Security Council idea of ministers and officials round the table, and that we are seeing replicated in the missions that Labour's doing. So that's a great thing. You know, that's a real step forward. So I think that's good. They need to make sure they've got the right people, because in a security sense, yeah, you have ministers and officials. If you're talking about delivery of a public service, you might actually want someone there from the charitable sector who understands about those things that government's not very good at. You might want to understand the community and local aspects of this. So you need to think carefully about how you set those things up. And you need to, all the time, this focus on what are the outcomes you're really trying to achieve. And I think that's the problem we've got at the moment, that we've got missions which have had kind of some kind input measures as their result, which is crazy, you know. So we need some really good outcome measures for all the missions, and then we need to sort out the how and what that means and what are the changes that we'd need in the system. And believe me, there are big changes. I mean, you take our civil service, for example. I mean, this is not causal, but since I left, the most senior civil servants, their pay is down by a quarter in real terms, right? That's in 12 years. The most junior ones is down by 11%. I mean, we have, but on the other hand, the bill's not come down very much. So we've basically gone for more quantity rather than quality. I would think about reversing that. And I think we do need to think very carefully about trying to think about all those things we can stop doing, right? There's got to be, particularly for this spending review that's coming up, if I were Cabinet Secretary now, I'd be saying to the Prime Minister, you have got to think about prioritization, and that means you can't do everything. We need to think about what are the priorities for us with our defense budget. You know, we try and do a very, very large number of things. I think we need to say what are things that really matter. And across all of the different departments, then think about, to achieve the outcomes he's after, some very ambitious outcomes in clean energy and stuff like that, then they're going to have to make some tough decisions about things they are not going to do. And I'm not hearing enough of that yet.
So I'm very conscious of time, and we have another event here about to start in Singapore. So I'm going to ask one final question to all of you, but you might need to keep your answer to this very brief. You mentioned in the UK, so our new government has come in and have these missions. It's a mission-driven government. That will inevitably mean you need to join up departments in a more collaborative way, a more effective way than they're currently working. When I joined the civil service in 1996, the big drive was to join up government, and we still haven't managed to do it. So finally, all of you, your advice to Chris is, how do you get government departments to work more effectively, more collaboratively together? Taimar, any thoughts from you?
I need to think about that for a minute. So if you can start, I'll think about it.
I'll come back to Gus because I know Gus and then Heather on this one.
Sure. I mean, you're absolutely right. This is one of those problems. You've got to define the lines of departments somewhere, and all of the power in our system lies with the Secretaries of State, right? They have the budgets. Prime Minister doesn't have a budget, right? He's got hardly anything there. There's no big pot of money that he can allocate out. So you need the Secretaries of State to collaborate, work with each other. You've got a real chance when you've got a new government coming in. Guys, you know, you're a unified team, you've campaigned together, stick together now, because if you divide, you'll fall. And that's how you achieve progress, is by all of you deciding jointly at cabinet level that you're going to make those missions work, and you are going to share budgets. Basically, you're saying to them, share the toys, right? Because that's the way these things work. Occasionally, the right answer is to move the boundaries of departments, but actually that is occasional, because you can spend a whole bunch of time rearranging the deck chairs.
And it'll never be ideal.
And it will never be ideal. So there's always boundary things, but basically it's big political oomph from the top, from the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, you know, the power from the centre saying, you have got to work together and you've got to do these trade-offs and prioritise.
Thanks. We have 30 seconds left, so Heather and then Taimar. Any advice on joining up government?
I would agree with that, the joining up of ministers around the cabinet table and having strong leadership, because I think our experience is that attempts to work together get interrupted by the vertical accountabilities up and that decision making. And from the public service point of view, the best thing that we have done and will continue to focus on is focus on the top team of leaders and foster that sense of team collaboration and invest time in those personal relationships.
Thanks. And finally, Taimar.
I don't know the UK system, but to share some Estonian experiences, is a year and a half ago we had a new government, and very much government office led. We rearranged the ministries, and then last summer we had a new government, and they started rearranging the ministries again. So when you do it quickly, focus, and don't keep on doing it, because otherwise you do the reforming all the time. You don't have time to do the substance.
Brilliant. Thank you very
Good
much.
advice.
Well, thank you to the three of you. We will now continue our conversations here in Singapore on public sector reform and digital transformation in particular. But I think I'm now going to hand back to London, and I hope this conversation has been useful and will feed into all the conversations you're having there at the conference. Thanks so much, everybody.